pretende sustentar opinião e discutir por discutir, só pra ganhar a discussão. Eu lhe asseguro, pode crer, que quando fala o coração, às vezes é melhor perder do que ganhar. Você vai ver, já percebi a confusão. Você quer ver prevalecer a opinião sobre a razão. Não pode ser, não pode ser. Pra que trocar o sim por não, se o resultado é solidão? Em vez de amor, uma saudade, vai dizer quem tem razão. Prevalecer a opinião sobre a razão. Não pode ser, não pode ser. Pra que trocar o sim por não, se o resultado é solidão? Em vez de amor, uma saudade, vai dizer quem tem razão. Em vez de amor, uma saudade, vai dizer quem tem razão. Em vez de amor, uma saudade, vai dizer quem tem razão.
Buenos días. Les pedimos de favor pasen a tomar sus asientos, ya que estamos a punto de iniciar la siguiente sesión.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Sí, por favor, podrían pasar a tomar sus asientos. Vamos a dar inicio. Vamos a dar inicio a nuestra primera sesión.
Sure. How are you?
Les pido de favor. Les pido de favor tomar sus asientos. Esta primera sesión.
We're ready to begin our first session of this forum, and it's going to be moderated by Vanessa Rubio. Vanessa Rubio is the Undersecretary for Latin America and the Mexican Caribbean.
Muchas gracias.
The floor is yours, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Welcome to this first session of our fourth forum on Latin American democracy that on this occasion is titled as Ruling the Future, the Latin American Democracy for 2020. We have a session that looks very interesting, very richful, and I am totally sure that it is also going to be lots of fun because we have great panel members that I would like to introduce. The idea of this first session is to talk about the topic of capitalism and democracy, a model in crisis. I would dare to say that maybe the way to put it today is capitalism, or should we talk about a model that needs to be updated, that it's a market system and market economy where the different countries have participated with different updatings of institutions and practices in their participation in the globalized economy. But this is actually the role of the panel members. But also the topic about democracy. I think that democracy is actually a principle that's been earmarked in international documents as the Charter of the United Nations, the Charter of the OAS, and the different process of regional integration such as the Pacific Alliance. So there is a general idea on that the fact that democracy is a principle that needs to be acknowledged and needs to be respected. So from the point of view of the panel members, we're going to see what they think about the interaction of the market economy and the democracy, and the idea is to achieve institutional development, participation of the different institutions, stakeholders, and entities of the political arena, and also to be able to achieve well-being, development, to fight poverty, and to fight inequality in our society. So we'll pass the floor to the panel members to see what they have to say. You all have the curricula of each one of the panel members, so I'm not going to talk about it. So we are going to pass the floor to Manuel Alcántara to begin with. He is a Spanish political scientist and an academic. He's very well known. He participates in different universities, including the Universidad Complutense in Madrid. And I will now pass the floor to Manuel Alcántara. He has 10 minutes, and 1 minute before his time is over, I will let you know, and you will know when you have 1 minute left. I promise you will. Thank you, Vanessa, And thank you to the Federal Electoral Institute, to the OAS, and to the different institutions for the invitation. Well, the thing is that I am here this morning because I am a Spanish scholar, because I come from a country with the 26.2% of unemployment rate, a country with an autonomous community that is about to be separated from the country, a country where we have trial the city hall of an important city, Marbella, a city hall that had been actually put into trial, and the previous mayors have been trialed and have been convicted, all those participating in that city hall. This is the country where I come from, a country that is undergoing a very severe crisis. So to talk about capitalism and to talk about democracy, it's also a very old topic, as Vanessa has already said it. So maybe it means that we should be talking about very interesting things. On one hand, the end of the 19th century, when the Social Democracia began as a bridge between both entities. But it looks evident that today we are undergoing a very severe legitimacy crisis that is affecting both components of these couple of topics that we're talking about. We're talking about the crisis of legitimacy of democracy, but also it's a crisis of the post-neoliberalism. By that, I mean of the last 6 or 8 years of the liberalism. So we could say as of the Lehman Brothers crisis began. And this crisis, just to give you a little idea about it, is centered in one of the elements that the authors that have worked about quality of democracy have called one of the variables of the democracy. They have used a special term, which is actually in English, and is the responsiveness, the capacity to respond of the system that is totally based upon the people's sovereignty. And all these comes also hand by hand with the loss of the power of the institutions. The institutions are now totally weak, and we can see it in the public surveys that are carried out at a national level, at European level, and I would like to talk about one that was actually talked about in the Spanish Political Science Congress about a week ago. She said that in a survey in 7 European countries, the percentage of about 18.4% with not a lot of trust and 16% for the political parties. So we're talking about, this is the survey in 7 European countries. Therefore, this crisis of lack of response, of lack of participation that is shown and that originates a clear lack of legitimation of the institutions, how could we approach it? I have a proposal, but I have to take into account time. I only have 8 minutes left. It's 4 focal points that I want to talk about. Where I think the problem is, and which I think we have to use as the focal points to speak about the topic. Number 1, I think there's been a clear reduction of the power of the state. And this is a result of different factors, of course. However, one of the most important elements is the reduction of the competencies of the state. And this is very clear if we talk about the regulation. When we talk about the financial problem, and I will talk about it several times, we realize that all the control mechanisms have failed. The Banco de España, in the case of Spain, failed. failed in the topic of the safe boxes and the savings systems and the retard systems. But there are other entities that also failed. We also have had a certain process of freedom in the markets that were not regulated at all, that were totally free. And then finally, privatization has reached levels of lack of transparency that are just incredible. In the case of Spain, privatization of hospitals shows my point very well. Hospitals that had to be nationalized, this is to saved with state monies to be made private later on again. So I think this is the idea is that we have a lack of politicization. And what do I mean? Two things. Number one, politics is now more personalized. We're talking about that this is the 500 years of the publication of The Prince by Machiavelli, maybe the very first text that talks about the personalization of politics. The leader in the last years has become, including because of the use of political campaigns and the presence of the media in political campaigns, has always been like a shortcut of knowledge. You rather vote for a person that vote for a program or for a political party, and that increases personalization. It does not only that. I think that the technocracy that is present, and this is also hand by hand of the process itself that we are titling crisis of this late neoliberalism, the technocracy has a role and has imposed to those that are well prepared to the fittest one to be nominated in post of responsibility. The Greek crisis, the Italian crisis shows exactly what I'm saying, the search of this type of technocrats. And the third one, the third element has to do with, more than talking about capitalism or this late neoliberalism, we should speak about the role that in the last years the financial power has achieved. The financial power in an environment in which we have seen that it has moved from doing nothing to doing everything by currency, and something that is totally surprising and that has been known as a private technicialism. This private technicialism is where the flows of capitals are private, but these flows of capital still go from the one that has the machine to produce the US dollars or the pesos or the euros. So we're talking about a financial power that creates a total amoral capitalism that is hand by hand with what we call the corruption of democracy. Not corruption in democracy, but corruption of democracy. So this lack of moral goes throughout the social life. It is not only between the relationship between public and private, or the state and private, but also throughout the private sector in itself. But there is another thing that is being produced, and something that is not totally new. It's like a new relationship between the political power and the economic power. And it is not only what I was saying about the arrival of the technocrats, but it is actually the location, and not only the location, but the implication of this economic power in the political life. Now I go into the fourth focal point that I wanted to talk about, which is what I call the overthrowing of sovereignty. During 3 centuries, for the case of the European situation, we have been going around sovereignty based upon the John Bonana ideas. Ideas that I have said before were very conventional, and many countries think that they still follow it. Their own currency, their own army, the power to set for their own taxes and to safeguard their own borders. But we know that that is not true anymore, and it changed in 1989. However, we have evidence that proves that. So what does these mean? We have a loss of sovereignty. To put it in a graphical way, now sovereignty is in the hands of large corporations, industrial corporations, financial corporations, and also because of the loss of sovereignty represented in the participation of international bodies. So in Europe, in Portugal, in Greece, they know what's the role of the Troika. And this is exactly the example of my saying. But as I said at the beginning of my presentation, there is also a loss of sovereignty that is not very clear, but that puts into risk national sovereignty and also the sovereignty of the entities and the private sector. What's going on in Scotland, it's another proof of what's going on, and also what's happening with the Catalan referendum in Spain. All this is weakening the classical power that in academic terms is what should be the explanation of what's happening right now and why we are having the crisis that we are having right now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Manuel. Very good ideas and with a lot of insight. I put on the table the topic of the fact that it is actually a historical discussion, but it's the market, is the state, you were saying, and the additional element of sovereignty vis-a-vis intranational, supranational, the adjustments that need to be done in the role of the state when talking about regulation, financial regulations, a specific financial regulation, and to reanalyze the role of the state as the director of the social policy, the one in charge of the social policy with which we're going to fight poverty. And I also put on the table the topic that if we have always talked about just one single model for democracy and one single model for market, we have had a lot of exercises, we have a lot of models that have been sort of tailored to global changes, but also the market economy has done it, and also the institutions in the market economy has done it. So we can not only talk about one model for democracy, we cannot talk about just one single model for market economy. They are all elements that are put together and that are part of the different processes that are being lived in several countries. Now I pass the floor to Carlos Navarrete, Ministry of Labor and Employment Promotion of the Federal District Government. Thank you very much. This is the excellent place to put on the table insight, questions, and different perspectives that are currently going on in Latin American countries. It is a pleasure for me to be a member of this panel to talk about a question that it is not an easy question. The topic of the panel is capitalism and democracy, a model in crisis. We could talk for 6 months about this. To summarize it in 10 minutes, it's quite difficult, but I'll try to give you some ideas. I have the impression that in Latin America, in the last 25 years, we have one good news and two bad ones. The good one is that there's been a transition period from authoritarian regimes to democratic ones. So we have had, during the traditional classical game of democracy, we have alternation in the power. Some win and some lose and go with the opposite party. However, by playing this game of democracy, those that are in the opposition may reach the government and the other way around. So that's one of the good news. With very specific examples in Latin America, the democratic system is working and is being understood as a system of free elections, competitive elections, with reliable entities, with reliable bodies, and with clear rules, more or less fair ones. Where when you lose, you accept it, and the one that wins is accepted. However, the bad news is that the generalization of the democratic life in Latin America has not meant an increase in the prestige of political stakeholders, or political parties, or politicians, the elections themselves. So there is a lack of satisfaction throughout the region that can be measured in different ways with regard to the quality of our democracy. However, there is especially a lack of satisfaction with the result that democracy has had. Not with regard to how we count the votes, how you reach power, but with regard to the topic of has democracy and the democratic game allowed to reduce the gap of inequality? And I think that's the main topic that we have to talk about in Latin America. In different words, has democracy served the political parties, the characters of the political parties, the elections, so that the inequality gap is reduced, is balanced? Has the regular citizen been able to feel that when he votes for a political party, he is voting for an economic project, he's voting for a proposal of a nation totally different to the one that is ruling at that time, something that is going to be better? And what's going to happen? What's the feeling of the voters when they go and support one person, and is that translated into an improvement in their living standards so that as a family they feel better with the better quality in their lives? Is it seen in income, in job creation, in housing, in education, in healthcare, in security, in the daily topics that any family has to go through every day and that want to have improved? And here we have a deficit that is quite strong, with more emphasis in some countries than in others. However, without a doubt, it is something that we should be concerned about as politicians, as scholars, academics, and as people in the government. I have the impression today that the old argument about capitalism and socialism is something that is now current. This old discussion to talk about this old stagnation or this neoliberalism, I think it's once again back on the table. I don't see in any part of Latin America something that is totally black and white as in the past. Now we have left regimes and right regimes in the center towards the right, in the center towards the left, sharing the same vision. It is needed that the state is strong enough as to guard the economy, but at the same time we need the market economy, with more emphasis in some places, but in most of the Latin American countries have already accepted this fact. We need the participation of the private sector in the development of the economy, in the investment. There are areas in which the private sector has to participate, and we just need public policies created by the state with which we can balance the inequalities of the market. Today, this goes together. Now, maybe we can talk about which one is most important and how to avoid the market imposing conditions to the state, and how to avoid the state to reach levels of problems that will hinder the development of the market. However, 20 years later, 25 years later, after the transformation, the results are not that good. And let me go back to my original point. Let me give you figures about Mexico City. 8,600,000 inhabitants, the capital of Mexico. In 1997, we had alternation. The ruling party for 70 years lost the election. At that time, it had been there for 67 years. So the left wing began ruling, ratified in 2000, ratified in 2006, and ratified in 2012. So we've been ruling for 16 years the capital of our country. This is not the Catalunya. We are not going to talk about what we've done good. I should, because I work for the city government, but that's not the point of my presentation. I'm going to talk about the rates of income, the income rate in Mexico City. In this city, 52% of our inhabitants receive maximum 3 minimum wages. So that's about 6,000 pesos, about 520 US. 52%. 10% of our population in Mexico City receives more than 10 minimum wages. And by the way, out of these 10%, I think 45% has income that goes even above those figures. And only 38% of the inhabitants receive between 3 to 9 minimum wages. So that means that the inequality of income, which results in a lot of things, after 16 years of being ruled by the left wing, is still the same. So this is just a reflection of what's going on throughout our country. But that doesn't make it any better. 42% of the Mexican population lives under poverty with less than 3 minimum wages as income, with very low health care, with terrible levels of education, with high levels of lack of security in many of our regions. So many of the electors would say, what's democracy for? What are elections for? What's alternation for? If we can have one political party ruling and then another political ruling, and even though we have important changes, nothing happens. For example, in Mexico City, we have built the social protection network, the most important one throughout Latin America. I don't know if I'm saying something that is totally crazy, because I don't know what's going on in Brazil right now, but I think that in Mexico we have a social security system that covers 5 million of the inhabitants, of the 8 million that I said before. So it's not that small. However, the social policy of the left wing has not been able to reduce the gap in income, and has not been able to close the difference between this 52% of lower income and the 10% with higher income. Of course, the social politic will sort of accommodate it, because it is not the same thing that one family has 5,800 pesos for 1 month to pay for everything, but to have the same income, but at the same time to have a scholarship for high school for the students, and at the same time to have health care included with free medication, with the free public transportation, children receiving free uniforms, free textbooks, free school supplies, free breakfast in public schools. So all these sets of social protection elements helps to balance a little the income, but it is by no means something that we have to do something about it. I'm going to finish my presentation by saying that in Mexico, going to talk about if democracy has changed the reality of our country or not. No. Now we have to talk about if all states within Mexico and the democratic governments can continue with the programs or not because of the presence of factual powers that try to subject the state and interests that do all they can to hinder the work of the government, those officers that are committed with the voters. Let me tell you that in Mexico City's Congress, we're talking about, in Mexico's Congress, we're talking about the tax reform. And those that have higher income are going crazy because they have to pay more taxes now. They don't like it. They don't like it. They don't want to pay more taxes. They don't want to be more transparent. They don't want to contribute with what we need in our country. They have also argued that they are protecting the middle class, just to argue something with which they can go against the tax reform. The ones that are protecting these type of interests are those that were in a tax paradise by paying very few taxes or none, and that has contributed to this social gap that I've been talking about. So, democracy, system of elections, competitive political parties, appealing stakeholders, we all have a debt and we all have homework to be done. How can we do it and how can we turn it into economic improvement, into life quality improvement for those that are going to go to vote every 3 years? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Navarrete. Undoubtedly, your ideas are very appealing, and they are inviting us to discuss, to have a dialogue, and to reflect upon them. I would like to highlight the element that you were talking about, an insatisfaction from the citizens in Latin America due to the quality of our democracies. And I would like to say and add that for the ability of the democratic institutions and systems and the political arrangements to achieve or to comply with this commitment, talking about the inequality, poverty, inclusion, these topics, I would also like to say that democracy undoubtedly and the market economy and most of the models that we follow have been working, and they're not enough, but they have worked. In 1990, for example, in Latin America and the Caribbean, the inflation was of 557%. Today it's 4.43%. GDP between 2010 increased by 2.2% each year. Last year it was 4.5%. Nearly 50 million inhabitants in Latin America left the poverty condition in the last decade, and the middle class during the last 5 years increased from 103 million people to 150 million people in the region. There has been some advances. These advances have not been enough, and there's a social claim and demand from our citizens that is very valid. And what to do? The topic of our session is for 2020. It can be that date or any date in the future. What we need to do or to improve our democracy and institutional arrangements for the future. It was implied by what you were just saying, that political actors in a country such as Mexico have to be able to unite within this democracy, to reach agreements that allow to make reforms and modifications to institutions and make the necessary reforms for a country to meet these needs of the social aspects that we were talking about. Now I would like to talk to José Thompson, Executive Director of the Interamericano Institute of Human Rights, for his presentation. Good morning, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be here today. I would like to acknowledge the organizing entities for the courage and the determination to create this forum, and for the possibility of creating these discussions and debates on where we stand on democracy topics and where we're going in the future. I would like to thank Dante Caputo not just for his research but for the very interesting way in which he explained it to us, and for how he is forcing us to think in terms of the future, because that would be something that in the different activities that I've been working on and insisting on has been the lack of national projects in most of Latin America, which explains this short-term nature of the political projects and how we are so focused on living in today and forgetting about tomorrow. If you ask me to do a meteorological prediction to 2020, I believe that if we don't change our direction, in 2020 we're going to have a Latin America that has a less economical growth than what we have right now, with political parties that are being questioned, with a representation crisis that is more open, with the legitimacy of Latin American democracies that is being challenged, and with an institutional framework that is weak and unable to solve the problems that may be attributed to the individual leaderships that are more or less charismatic or populist that are generated in Latin America. So I have a few suggestions of the changes that we could make. First, on the question that's been set for us, where we will be in terms of economic model. Is capitalism exhausted, or is this neoliberalism, this delayed neoliberalism that Manuel Alcántara was talking to us about, is evident in the last years? That we have a political model, an economical model in question. It's now debunked that we have an invisible hand that is controlling. We now know that banks are not the best place for people to keep their money, and we have also learned that human greed has no limits. Therefore, right now, our plans of what to do with the money of others are being greater than how to make this money grow. We have also, and regrettably, learned that this delayed capitalism lacks ethical references, and I subscribe with what Manolo was just saying. Actually, we have no ethical reference that is guiding our action beyond now or today or immediacy. But it's also evident that capitalism won't extinct anytime soon. We don't have a model or system that could replace it right now. The truth of this is, on the other hand, we have serious concerns from the international community on where this model is taking us. These are worries that take different guidelines, but have some environmental concerns of how our world or our planet is going to be affected by this, and ethical concerns of where the individual stands in a society where he is just seen from his capacity point of view. And those are topics that we have to set because we are getting them more and more often in Latin America. Perhaps in our environment we didn't have any sequels from other parts of the world, and we had some other inter-individual references that were stronger besides consumerism. But this is getting to this region, and we can see it now. It's very evident. On the other hand, we have an extended democracy. I agree with the previous speakers. We have an extended democracy in Latin America where there are troubles, there are serious troubles on what the functional crisis from the political parties, because we only have political parties that are electoral machines, and they don't have functions of representing the countries or the interests that they had in the past. We have a representation crisis that is very open, and we don't have any answers to these problems. How are we going to have a better representation, and how are we going to relate this better to our societies? On the other hand, the figures that our moderator has just shared with us are very encouraging. If it weren't because Latin America is still the region in the world that has more inequality, and even those countries that have decreased their poverty levels have increased the inequality in the sectors. And there's something we are doing that is deeply wrong in our democracies. And it is true that people in a democratic government should have an expectation that is kind of realistic. And this is not happening clearly for the citizen in Latin America. At least we have a right original legitimization. We don't have more coup d'etat. We have systems that are relatively sophisticated. Some European people say that we are the most sophisticated area in electoral institutions, but we have serious problems with the legitimization of the exercise of power. Our models follow short-term projects because of the leaders' purposes, instead of having long-term achievements that direct us not just 2020 but 2050. And where can we stand as a region, and how can we become more powerful in this sense? We must ask ourselves, is it legitimate that a government that, in spite of being correctly elected in the ballots, that lacks the ability of solving their citizens' problems in terms of a better economic well-being and security? It seems that the answer is no. Therefore, we also have a legitimacy crisis of the democratic government. This original legitimacy is not calling these claims of the people of how the government is being exercised was in the positions of power. I'm not going to give you a solution. I don't think I have a solution to this. I don't know anyone who can have a solution. But I believe that in our side of the world, we should recover these sovereignties that have been progressively debilitated or weakened, and we should achieve some international basic agreements that work as ethical referrals and that direct our government towards a better well-being of our citizens, beyond of the political projects that are short-term. And maybe for political formation they have, we should allow that human rights and international treaties on human rights, so that we can, in all of these human rights, not just in one or two of them, so that we can achieve more legitimacy in our governments and to have an action that is more complete on public terms. I believe that, I mean that human rights are related to the origin of our governors or authorities in terms of what happens in the elections, and this may be explained in the existence or not, or lack thereof, of political rights. If we start thinking on how a government should be relating with the citizens, we can understand that the environment of freedom is totally essential for people to have a development as humans. But we know that there are some cultural, economical complexities that we are not paying attention to as we should, and that these make part of the human rights of citizens, in spite of that there are some systems that these ideas of economical and cultural rights are not taken account for. In consequence, I give you not a solution, but I leave an area to discuss, so that from here to 2020 we have some actions and debates to world included Latin America. And these are the good news, as I was just saying. The fact that for the first time, as we read in Caputo's book, the history of democracy is not long, it's actually short in terms of the world history. We should have, for the first time in Latin America, the longest amount of years of countries living in democracy is not a major issue, and the main stars of this democracy is a world that's full of uncertainty and difficulties. It's a dialectics of modernity. And the second question is a new cycle within modernity, or is it that we are changing times? And that is why uncertainty doesn't let social sciences to determine. We are at the doors of change, as a Mexican recently wrote, from the times of Westphalia to the post-Westphalia times. It changes of such a magnitude and deepness that we have to be more careful and be more careful when foreseeing our future. And those are some of the issues presented in Dante Caputo's book. My second reflection has to do with the four scenarios that the book presents us. These four scenarios that Dante Caputo shows for the following years up to 2020 depend essentially on two or four or three economical variables located in the international context. If the commercial exchange and the interest rates stated by countries such as US, Europe, or the markets, international markets linked, especially in South America to China, have and show some disadvantages that haven't been able to be evident in the last 2, 5, and 6 electoral cycles, then the most likely scenario is one in which are optimistic, favorable, that is moderate, in which things are going to be going on the way they have us to right now. We should not disregard that the last electoral cycle, 2008, 9 up to 2013, beginnings of 2013, has been sparked due to the economic crisis of 2008 and 2009. However, the 18 Latin American democracies still went on, and the periodicity terms of the mandates, so only in Honduras and Paraguay where there was some kind of eruption or political tension, but they have still moved on. The two most difficult scenarios, the most optimistic and the most negative or unfavorable. The most optimistic because if we have better conditions in the world economy in these three axes, international axes that are US, China, and Europe, then in Mexico, Central America, including Dominican Republic and South America and its two regions, these countries can have a better response from their governments in public policies and social expectations, and we can see this pluralist democracy blossom even more, just as Carlos Navarrete was pointing out in terms of the achievement of our democracy. But this is also a problem because we are, before what Daniel Sabato just reminded us of, we are over expectation of the new middle classes that are just emerging, that with all its weaknesses are demanding services and goods. And in these new conditions that this new democracy has encouraged them, and the social policies have encouraged this as well. There are two ends of this population pyramid that are pushing the democracies very much. On the first hand, we have our senior population because we have a longevity that we have never before seen in our history in Latin America. And on the other hand, the young communities that are coming knocking to the work doors and also coming to the representative democracy, of participation in democracy. And here we have a home that if we don't take care of in this following years, we're going to have bigger dissatisfactions. The most favorable scenario that Dante Caputo shows us in his book is that we have an increase in the interest rates in the US and the replica of this in Europe, and that China lowered its consumerism pattern, that this got actually complicated in the international market, especially for South American countries. And of course, we would suffer as Mexico, Central America, and the Dominican Republic, we would suffer somehow less, a lot, but for example, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico would suffer a little bit less because of the articulation of their industrial economies. In general, these are the scenarios, if I'm not misquoting you, Dante, but I just have a quick panorama of your final chapter in the book. And with the minutes that I have left, I would just like to say that for the next electoral cycle that begins in 2013 in Honduras in November 24, and that is going to extend as happened in the last cycle in 2013 with the Mexican election, we're going to have this extension from 2013 to the Mexican election in 2018. So we have, once again, all of the Latin American countries in the new electoral cycle. We have to wait in any of the four scenarios when that the electoral systems, particularly electoral organisms, are still smashed because of the plurality politics, because it's more strong, and that these organisms have to be strengthened, modernized, and that these electoral organizations take seriously the integrity and ethics of their associations and the members. And of course that they are able to lead the electoral processes that are transparent, accredited, and second, that the political parties can actually make way to a greater institutionalization and breaking this legacy of the parties that were created in the industrial and capitalism eras, and that they can actually learn and read and understand these new needs of the 21st century, opening to the networks, to be open to supervisions, and being able to become social movements in favor of the people and in favor of the citizens that are voting for them. And to I don't want to overextend my time, but I would also like to say that it is very important what is happening in Mexico, and it seems that it's going to be happening in El Salvador and other countries, that the political classes have to understand each other, cooperate, and create a project that is long-term, which has been lost thanks to the immediacy, the present. We should have a political framework and system that is not necessarily formal, but just a political system, whether formal or informal, that has some guidelines and practices that allow for a dialogue and reduces this polarization, increases the cooperation, and of course increases the results that the Latin American communities expect. Of course, that this happens in complex environments. Thank you very much, Raúl. Very good ideas that give us a lot of insight, and especially each one of our panel members have talked about different focal points that are actually enriching the presentations, and we'll make a wrap up of all this with the participation of the participants. I would put on the table the topic of democracy and the institutions of markets to be ready to satisfy social demands and also to be ready to face the risks there too. I guess that the insight and learnings of recent crises have given us the need of creating new ideas, and I would actually elaborate on what you are saying. Even the things that you thought that was never going to happen, either from the positive point of view or from the negative point of view, can happen. So actually we need to do an adequate exercise of preparation. There are councils that have to do with risk analysis, led by the Banco de Mexico, where the different stakeholders and the different institutions need to be better prepared to face the issues. Another very interesting point is how new groups are being formed and are asking for special things. One of the questions that we have always put on the table is the participation of minorities in democracy, and not only by voting, but in a more productive manner. You were talking about the creation of demands by the elderly. In Mexico, for example, when we started the Mexican Institution for Social Security, we had 26 people active for every one retired. Now we have 2 dependents. Of course, elderlies are going to be the population that is going to need more help. And the creation of the middle class, that middle class has a lot of demands, specific demands, as it has happened in Brazil, and the different riots that we have been seeing in the region that we should take into account when talking about democracy and market economy. Now I'm going to pass the floor to the very last of our panel members, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. Our next speaker is William Sweeney. He was the Vice President of the National Democratic Committee, and he is currently the member of the Advisory Committee of the Global Commission on Democracy, and he works for the IFES. Primero que nada, muchísimas gracias. Quiero agradecer al IFE y a todas las entidades que organizaron este foro. Felicidades a los panelistas y a la gran moderadora. Parece que voy a hablar como un verdadero gringo. Vengo a México sin hablar español bien, por lo tanto tengo que hablar en inglés, y vengo a darles consejos sobre cómo funciona la política y el gobierno en base a la maravillosa experiencia de los Estados Unidos y su maravilloso Congreso estadounidense, que está en paro y que parece disfrutar mucho el aceptar y el promulgar leyes que no funcionan, y cuando toda la gente está en su casa sin trabajar por todas las disputas políticas que se llevan a cabo por los partidos políticos. O sea, a eso vengo, a darles consejo, imagínense. Pero la realidad es que la tensión que todos sentimos es porque los modelos no nos están dando lo que esperamos o lo que queremos, ya sea como líderes políticos o como ciudadanos. Y la verdad es que esta tensión probablemente continúe hasta que la crisis económica de los últimos 10, 20, 18, 8 o años crónicamente quieran darle a ustedes, empiece a ser abordada con creación de empleo. No con creación de empleo artificial, a través de compras de mercancías con la riqueza nacional, no. Creación de empleos donde realmente se le dé trabajo a los cientos de personas, especialmente a las personas en las que nos tenemos que enfocar actualmente, es decir, a las que en primer término son los que tienen su primer ingreso a la fuerza laboral, que en muchos países, especialmente en los europeos, como en España, estamos hablando de una generación perdida o 2 generaciones perdidas, porque el sector público-privado, como quieran ponerlo, no está generando empleos. Todos estamos en nuestra economía. El sector público por sí solo no es la respuesta, porque el sector público por sí mismo está sobreextendido en todas las economías de nosotros. Entonces necesitamos encontrar el nuevo motor, cualquiera que este sea, el nuevo generador de oportunidades para todos nosotros y para nuestra niñez, y por la tecnología médica, por la longevidad, por la nutrición mucho mejor, y sí, de hecho también por la paz, es decir, que los países no se están matando entre sí en bases cotidianas, o que no hay ninguna lucha interna en países donde se mueran cientos de personas en guerras. Estamos viviendo más tiempo, entonces tenemos una fuerza laboral que dura más tiempo. Entonces, todos estos aspectos están frente a nosotros. Ahora, lo maravilloso de todo este panel al describir los problemas es que en realidad nadie ha dicho, regresemos a la antigüita, a los buenos tiempos, al pasado, al régimen donde solamente había un partido político, donde no había competencia, donde no se prestaba atención a los derechos humanos, donde el capitalismo no era algo público, donde nadie, porque la forma en que tú conseguías los permisos para explotar minas o para poder hacer cierto tipo de cosas era porque eras el cuñado del presidente, o porque eras este o porque eras otro. Nadie está hablando sobre regresar a esto. La pregunta es, ¿qué hacemos con los modelos que tenemos actualmente y cómo podemos generar mayores oportunidades con mayor transparencia en estos modelos? Y los retos que tenemos a nivel mundial son retos que tienen que ver con confianza, con la confianza en el sistema, con la confianza en los modelos. He trabajado en el sector privado más de 30 años antes de ser el asesor en el que como trabajo actualmente. Si ustedes analizan la forma en que se les paga a los directores generales de la empresa del sector privado, y esto se sabe ahora porque tiene que ser público por obligación legal, y si te fijas ahora también, el promedio tuvo un aumento del 13%, y el promedio de los directores generales ganaba $14 millones en compensaciones. Ahora, esto está en contraposición con la caída de la mayoría de los salarios, que básicamente han estado congelados para la fuerza laboral, para la mano de obra, y los diferentes problemas en el mercado no han creado nuevas oportunidades, no han creado nuevos empleos. Por lo tanto, tenemos un problema de confianza relacionado con el sistema de valor del mercado. Entonces, hablemos sobre la política en los Estados Unidos. Una de las maravillosas cosas de la política y del Internet es que millones de personas actualmente están participando financieramente y vocalmente en la política estadounidense. Están utilizando el Internet, están utilizando sus teléfonos inteligentes, están participando en la campaña de Obama de una manera impresionante. Si te pedían $3 para firmar, y entonces jurarías que si dejaban de mandarte correos, mejor les dabas 20 con tal de que te dejaran en paz, pero no te dejaban en paz, te seguían mandando todo esto. Ahora, todo va en contra de la caída de nuestra última elección presidencial, donde más de 1,000 individuos participaron en la revisión de qué pasó con $150 millones. Estos se presentaron como los contribuidores de $150 millones, 1,000 personas. Y por supuesto que la Corte Suprema argumentó que se tenían que establecer límites y eran 153 millones, lo cual es 3 veces el ingreso medio de la familia promedio en los Estados Unidos. Estamos hablando de una barrera establecida para arreglar las cosas, y la Corte Suprema lo estableció así, y esto estableció la política de desconfianza entre el 1% y el 99%. Esto es lo que está pasando también en el mercado privado de capitales, donde el 1% que se encarga de las instituciones financieras y de las corporaciones financieras, sus trabajadores y sus accionistas, y los que se encargan de esas decisiones son los que toman las decisiones de todo el resto. Estos retos de confianza están inmersos y son reales y son impresionantes, y se están dando en un momento en la vida que todos los que ya tenemos canas podemos hablar de diálogos, de conversaciones, de desarrollo de relaciones, y todos los que estamos aquí que fuimos a la universidad, acostumbrábamos a comunicarnos con 18 o 25 palabras y que creemos que ahora eso es una gran conversación y ya no usan el teléfono y ya no vas con tu colega para hablar directamente y lo vemos como una realidad operativa. Entonces, ¿cómo es que nuestras sociedades han logrado dos objetivos o pueden lograr estos dos objetivos? Uno es atraer a más personas al proceso. Me sorprende muchísimo a mí, como en este seminario y en otros seminarios, más del 50% de la población en la mayoría de las sociedades son mujeres. Y sin embargo, las mujeres no están representadas
Every single profession
en todas y cada una de
in
las
our society, aside from motherhood, where they have an exclusive. Youth. We have larger and larger young populations. They are getting better and better educated in some regards and finding fewer and fewer opportunities. Traditionally, if you look over the course of history, it is when the frustration of the youth reaches a boiling point that societies take very radical steps. And finally, we have the phenomena of older people. We have the phenomena that we are seeing life expectancies into the 80s in most of the countries. Now, all of these challenges we want to address within the models of democracy and capitalism, because both of those models so far for the last 50, 75 years seem to work. We can go through an economic crisis, as my colleague just said, and go through an electoral cycle with almost no challenge to democracy. We can go through booms and busts with no basic challenge to the capitalist system. The talk is constantly reform. How do we improve it? How do we get more people involved? How do we share more information? And particularly for government, how do we move from being in-line to online? Because that is where everything else is going in this society, in this world. And if anything, it's only going to increase, it's only going to become faster, it's only going to become more commonplace as a challenge to governing institutions rather than slow down and allow us to take a breath. And with that, I think I'm under 10 minutes, so I'm going to end this right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, William. I think that you summarized perfectly what has been said. You also introduced your own topics, and I do believe that your conclusion represents what has been said in the panel. We need in the economic model of free market and the need of it in democracy, both need to be more efficient, both need to deliver more results to the population, and both need to be more transparent and be more inclusive. And you added an element that had not been put on the table, and that's the gender topic, the underrepresentation of women. And not only that, the wages that are totally below the wages received by men. You also talked about the topic of creating trust. And I think that trust cannot be created without results. So how can we deliver better results from the economic point of view? How can we deliver better results with a strengthened democracy, with institutions that are sound, and with dialogue in democracy or agreement in democracy with which, as you have said it, can deliver results to the citizens. So with this, we close the initial presentations of our panel. I have with me several questions already, which I appreciate, and I'm doing my best effort to summarize them, to put them together, the ones that can be put together for the same person. So I'm not going to read them as they were sent to me, because time will not allow us to do it. but I'm going to pose a couple of questions to each one of the panel members, which I think are the most representative. For Manuel Alcántara, they say, is democracy and capitalism still compatible? Because you were saying that in the past, when trying to make it compatible, democracy and socialism, is that the social democracy was created, or the third avenue, as is being called in some other places. And the question is, if today is being revised, the economic model of the free market and the model of democracy, but also the social democracy, the third avenue. So that's the first question for Manuel Alcántara. I'll make the second one, you'll answer, and then I'll continue with the rest of the panel members. And for Manuel, the second question is the role of the left wing in the neoliberal schemes. For example, it's been said that the title of the presentation talks about capitalism, the market system, the neoliberal system, or however you want to call it. But what's the role of the left in this economic model? So the floor is yours for your answer, and then we'll pass the floor to our next panel member. They're going to have 5 minutes for answering the questions and wrapping up. We have 30 minutes for this last session, so please dedicate 5 minutes to answer the questions posed to you and make a final reflection or insight. Okay, Vanessa, Dante talked about the joke about the flight, and I'm going to use the same. And I will have to ask the ones that pose the question to see what's democracy for them and what's capitalism for them, because maybe we are not under the same definition, and also what they mean by the left. So actually the questions are impossible to be answered. But you are going to allow me to make my insight. The issue or the advantage or the beauty of democracy and electoral democracy, and I think that you all agree with me, as you have already said it, is that it is a democracy that has worked to a certain extent in Latin America and other countries in the last 50-60 years. And it's because it's based upon an individual performance. In theory, capitalism is not based upon an individual basis, even though we live in the lie that as consumers we are individuals. So there is individualism in capitalism, and that is actually capitalism, the one that has created one of the George Orwell's fantasies, that we all have a number, that each one of us has a number, your phone number, your mobile phone number. So that's the individualization, so that's the segmentation of the market to individual basis, as it could be the democracy based upon the vote, based upon the idea of one person, one vote. However, we know that things are not as easy as that. We know that capitalism, and I don't know who, but someone said it already. Well, actually no, but we could quote Diane Smith. Capitalism tends to monopoly. So it's false. It's what Margaret Thatcher used as bait for popular capitalism. We know that it's a total lie. It's a total lie. And capitalism actually tends to monopoly, and therefore, by monopoly are the figures that we have received that have to do with the U.S. political life. Very few people can purchase a lot of things, amongst which airtime, spots, and votes. Because we have not talked, maybe this is another topic for another panel, we have not talked about vote purchasing. Different work for different countries could be speaking about the fact that the purchasing of votes in Latin America could be up to 20%. Of course, those that have money can purchase votes. So who is accruing everything? If we talk about a democracy and the results here, if we talk about a democracy where we can include the word deliver or democratic products, the products of democracy or the products, if we want to talk about the most basic ones, and Hobbes said it 400 years ago, the first thing to do is to guarantee life for people. If I remember correctly, the figures of those that have lost their lives in Mexico in the last 7 years are just horrifying. I'm not going to bring them out. So, if you have a policy that cannot guarantee the life, I'm talking about life, the most sacred value of things. But we have also talked about inequality, poverty, and what it means and how it is linked to the lack of education, the lack of health care or appropriate health care, exploitation of women, exploitation of children, etc. And many democracies are not delivering that. These are not products of their political decisions. So maybe there is compatibility between these two schemes. However, now that we are going into the future and forecasting the future, it is astonishing for me that the name China has not been said in the panel. And China is maybe one of the many models that could be followed, where we have the couple of totalitarianism and capitalism, which is a scenery where we don't want to think about it. And that takes me to a second question. The left. Many of the lefts in Latin America are very happy with what's going on in China. They are very happy, very satisfied. It's perfectly fine to have debts with China. Maduro came back from Peking not long ago, and he was very happy by saying, I am very, very happy because I have with me 5 billion US. Like if he had brought them and he doesn't have to give them back. He was very happy. So the role of the left in this scheme is quite complicated because we have to define the left that we are talking about. And this is actually a discussion that is open and has been open forever. The utopical socialist and the scientific one. The communist and anarchist. And so how can we define the left? And of course we have to take into account the social democrat tradition. So we need the definition of what the left is. But if we go down to the level and we talk only about Latin America, and if we take into account the literature that's been produced in the last 5 years, there are many, many excellent books that talk about this, of Latin American, French, and U.S. authors. And maybe we could say that this pink tide, because that was its name, is full of elements that may be common, but at the same time we can see sort of a cloud. Which are the common elements? The left speaks about stagnation. The left talks about non-imperialism, but that means no to the US only. That left talks about the lie of regional integration. So maybe those could be the three common denominators that very important characters would use, such as Mojica, Pepe Mujica, Cristina Fernandez, Mr. Maduro, Correa, Evo Morales, the people from the EFLMN from El Salvador, without talking about the president, the people from the RPM, the people from Morena locally in Mexico, or the people from the PT in Brazil. But then the reality is totally blurred and there is no left. Because the left depends upon their national context and their national traditions and their personality of each one of the individuals are heading that left. So actually, in any case, the left, if we want to use the word plural or heterogeneous, doesn't have the answer to these issues, or its answer is a short-term one.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for your intervention and the very hard task of answering these complex questions that we have and of summing it up. I would now give the microphone to Mr. Navarrete with a couple of questions. The first one is, if capitalism truly gives democracy to the Mexican community, and particularly the left-wing framework against the free market proposals. And the second question is, if the social assistance policies in Mexico if we we feel defeated in poverty and now we're trying just to reduce it instead of eliminating it at all. What you could say about this? And a brief closing statement, please. Of course. Can there be democracy in a free market model? I believe it can. The only answer I know against this is what happens in Cuba, in Havana. Because we know that if such a system as the one they have has no democracy, and that democracy is an alternative to, and their democracy is completely opposite to what we know democracy in the rest of the world. I believe that we also have to locate democracy within a context. The same way that we can talk about a left wing in the world, or just one left wing in the world, but we talk about several left wings, we also have to think that democracy has some particularities of its own depending on the societies where it's actually happening. I'm glad that our colleague is talking to us about the North American democracy that has the power in needles. Hardly the US can right now go out to the world and say that that North American democratic model is the model that all the world should follow. It's very difficult for them to do this. Democracies have some particularities depending on the societies where it's being developed. The development of their political forces, their historical traditions. In Latin America, the populist tradition and the charisma of the leaders is very strong. It comes from the times of the post-colonial times. It passed through the independency times. It consolidated in the 19th century, it transcended to the 20th century, and we have some sparks of it in the 21st century. We can't ignore it. Men that communicate with the people directly, and to which the conception, the political parties are no other thing but instruments, electoral instruments, but are not the democracy instruments. The democracy of such thing as positions, just positions, where a leader of squares, where a leader talks and the people listen, where the leader directs and the people follow those directions. So each country has particularities of its own. Professor Mandaveira, and I believe you know him, usually says that social compensation policies applied in different progressive governments of the left wing in Latin America haven't eliminated but actually consolidated the very unequal system that we have in Latin America, and in a very harsh critique of these policies, including those in Brazil and other countries. He says that the ruling left wing in these countries have ceased fighting for equality and are actually trying to compensate and follow these compensation policies, trying to temper this brutal sequence of the free market systems. That's a critique that he has. And one may think, well, is this true or not? In very unequal societies, compensations are very important. These are oxygen policies that are given to a sick or a deceased person. So we have to provide an immediate policy, because in Mexico there are 5 million families that if they didn't have these compensation policies, they wouldn't have anything to eat the next day. For example, our senior citizens. Yesterday I was in a labor fair, a job fair for seniors, and this senior citizen said, "Thank you for the 1,900 pesos that you give us each month." This is not solving the marginalization problems, but it's helping these people to provide for their basic needs. The problem here is not in compensation policies. The problem is arises when we're trying to design these transformation policies to transform the economical model in a deep way. And I'm going to be very polemic with my left wing from the PRD party. Many of these people say in their discourses and models, we have to have an alternative model and discourse. And we say, yes, okay, let's see this. To show it to me, what's your plan? What's your model? And they all end up suggesting corrective measures of this model, but not of a totally alternative model. Truly, very great thinkers of our left wing in Mexico haven't been able to solve this problem, and they also haven't had the courage to say we don't have a solution, we don't have another model, because there isn't such a model. Up to now, Professor Mandarina says that there is a model, and I think we should listen to him. He gives 10 rules and guidelines of the measures that Latin American governments should abide to in education, job, health terms, in all these topics. And I would like to conclude by saying that left wings in Latin America, as my colleague just mentioned, in this diversity and each reality, we have great challenges ahead. How can we democratically change the conditions in our countries, and how can we achieve those things that we're promising during the campaigns when we're in the government? Right now, when I'm working at the government of our city, I've learned that when we're in the opposition, we have all the solutions to the problems. Once you're in the government, you have all the problems to apply the solutions. The situation changes radically. It's not the same to make protests in the government palaces. It's not the same than being behind the desks trying to design and show policies to solve all the problems that the opposition says they were so easy to solve. There's people that say that Mexico doesn't need to charge any kind of taxes. We just need to cut into half the the wages of all the citizens and eliminate all the mobile phones and cars, and that way we'll have money for everyone. It's very easy to say and have solutions, but you don't have the responsibility of running the country. The left wings in Mexico, because we're going to have 4 left-wing parties in 2015 elections. We have great challenges. And I think it's good that we are in touch with the realities in Latin America, so that we know that in each of these countries we need to build our very own responses regarding to the local challenges that we have with our communities. Thank you, Secretary. And now I have 2 questions for José Thompson. One of them is, what future can the democracy have if we take a step away from the citizen exercise and it's more subject to the game of influences and powers of the elite sector? The second question is, how can we make it tangible for people, all these improvements or these reformulations of the democratic systems and of the market economies? How can we make this perceivable by our people, and that they assume that the politicians and the democracy itself is actually giving an answer, and it's worried about making changes to comply with their to meet their expectations? Well, my questions are so simple as the ones before. And that have been given to us by IFES for a guideline to this debate. Well, I believe that one of the greatest topics of the contemporary democracy is how are we going to guarantee what Manuel just said a few minutes ago, the principle of a person, a vote, which is absolutely fundamental, which is why we had to make an effort to guarantee the fundamental topic when talking about the future of democracy in Latin America. And we're talking with people and experts. Those terms such as equity in the elections, terms of the electoral mechanics on the day of the elections are important, but they are not the center of our debates in most of the countries. The center of this debate is actually more into what is being asked in the first question. How are we going to guarantee that those who have more money and more power don't become more than one vote, and therefore entitling them to lead how the political life is going to be headed? And then it's also the term of the funding in policies, in politics. How much money is someone giving and why? Bill Sweeney just talked about this regarding the North American reality, and the worst is that in Latin America, with the spreading of international delinquency, how is someone owing someone in the politics, and what is being asked in exchange, and if this is coming from illegal sources? Right now, we don't have to only talk about the game of influence and power within the elites, but also between the international delinquency and the irregular funding that have a word, not just at a territorial level, but at a national level. The second topic, talking about the media. I know that this was a whole topic in Mexico this past electoral campaign, but who actually has access to the media? And if the media have not become themselves in a way of, in a kind of elite that decides who is going to have more exhibition and who's going to have less exhibition and be more invisible in an electoral process. Once again, here we have a topic of actual concern. It's not easy to solve any of these problems because we could have conferences here of funding control, media access, equal representation, but also we have to focus on the how are we going to become efficient. If you see, we have made advances in that. Latin America is in its representational bodies is not just white people, Catholic people, and metropolitan people and men. But we haven't advanced enough so that we are actually representing the diversity that we have in our societies. And that is another challenge that has to do with how to minimize the power of these elites, and especially in this complex scenario where power is divided in a much more visible way with these elements that I was just talking to you about. I am very worried about ethics in democracy. I believe that these are unavoidable debates in each of the countries. Solutions are not easy. For example, you in Mexico have made trials on access to the media. You have had measures that have no precedence in Latin America. We should make a balance on what we have learned, what worked, what didn't work, what we have to correct. But I'm very honest by saying that this is a never-ending debate where we're going to be questioning once and again regarding the topics that as we approach the elections. When you tell me that how we can, my second question on how we can make improvements more tangible to citizens, the truth is that we're also failing here, especially in two levels in Latin America. First, in having indicators that could measure something more than what we have been able to measure right now. We have per capita income. We have been able to measure especially human development elements that we've been able to measure, such as health, education, but we're still not able to make tangible how the life of our citizens is improving or how it's not improving. Which are the developments that each individual is having compared to what they have now or what they didn't have. And if it's a real need or if it's a created need, that just Manolo was telling that we're now a number, our mobile phone number. What would be of us today if we didn't have a mobile phone? Those of us who lived in the pre-mobile phone era, we know that we can live there in that era, and we can have very productive debates in that era. But once engagement could be parallel to the development of technological utilities, which as electricity depend on nature, are a human invention. Human inventions are a great creation to defend humans from all the risks, whether it is to ensure the well-being of just one being or to the community, or to bring material which is easy when this practice is made by the powerful elites, those people who have access to weapons or to other mediums to subject their fears at a greater scale. I believe that this thought has a lot to do with what the questions that were said to me. Thank you very much. I will now go to Raúl Ávila that has two questions. Question one, how can we talk about democracy if we have social inequality? And the second one is democracy a prerequisite for social well-being? I'll give a quick response to both of these questions, and then I would like to make a few remarks on this book. First of all, I remember the theory of the four corners of inequality and democracy, and this is in history which works as a good tool. Past is a great tool to foresee our future. And we have records that there are cycles of democracy with some prosperity, but we've also had some falls of extreme poverty. And of course, there's a break of evolvement of the democratic model. So is democracy possible with inequality? Up to a certain point. When several factors occur at the same time, of course, it's subject to some features of the democratic model. That's where I rest my case. And the second question, is it a prerequisite? Well, history shows us, and comparative history of recent times, that we've just talked about China and other countries, that between 11 to 6 countries that do not have democratic elections in our world, but that they still have sole parties, they have some certain degrees of prosperity. A plural democracy is not a prerequisite, but it is a requisite that gives more freedom and gives chance to debate social projects and developments. Now, I would like to highlight, to make justice to Dante Caputo's work, that there is a concept very salvageable here for decision makers on political, on social policies, that is the demandable democracy and the well-being democracy. And he takes us, which Richard Rorty has reminded us in his book Expectations or Knowledge, that we shouldn't have an expectation that we are going to a heaven on earth in the scenarios that Dante Caputo is showing us, but we're also not leading to a hell on earth, which is the fourth most unfavorable scenarios. But no, it's about knowledge, objective, accessible, operable knowledge we use to make decisions. This means that if we're producing unfavorable scenarios, these legitimate scenarios and the rights that have to be guaranteed are the most basic rights. The most basic rights. That is the democracy that may be exigible, demandable, and that all people should be entitled to. The benefits of having this are simply a lot. And the second concept is the well-being democracy. Of course, if we're doing well, we should surpass from this. We should make some other more sophisticated rights. We should make them entitled. And say for Joseph's interventions on human rights, we are evolving in Latin America and in particular in some national states. We're going from the legality state to a constitutionality state. We believe in this and we're putting it into practice. We're not just studying it. This means that the Constitution nowadays and all regulations have a content that has actual worth. In the legality state, a code, a law, an act, we didn't care about it, but the regulatory hierarchy. Right now, it cares, it matters, because the public morale, that is not the Christian or Catholic morale, but the public and the public morality that comes from all the cultures and the Western cultures is present here in the Constitution, thanks to the principles. These principles is the thing that democratic societies believe in. Those could be democratic societies that elect their representatives, and that is a democracy that's been constructed to enter into covenants and agreements, and that